One night alone, I awoke to find myself wed to the alien queen. Jackson Wells had always been the kind of man who believed in logic and reason. As an astronaut for the United Earth Expeditionary Force, he had trained for every possible scenario. But nothing could have prepared him for the strange turn his life would take on this remote planet. It started like any other mission. He and his crew were assigned to explore an uncharted world on the edge of human territory. Their task was simple: gather data, take samples, and return home. But when their ship suffered a catastrophic failure, they were stranded far from the safety of their command center. Jackson found himself alone in the dense alien jungle, the hum of the ship's damaged systems the only reminder of what had gone wrong. He had lost contact with the rest of his crew, and the only thing that mattered now was survival. The planet was a place of haunting beauty. Towering trees with translucent leaves stretched toward the sky, while strange, glowing flowers lit the forest floor. Jackson had never seen anything like it, and he marveled at the alien landscape as he navigated through the jungle. He knew he had to find shelter and food if he was to survive, but the deeper he ventured, the more uneasy he felt. There was something wrong, something watching him from the shadows. As dusk fell, Jackson stumbled upon an ancient structure. It was unlike anything he had ever seen, massive stone pillars rising from the ground, adorned with strange markings and symbols. The entrance was flanked by towering statues of beings he didn't recognize, their faces cold and impassive. The structure seemed abandoned, but there was a faint glow from within, and Jackson's instincts told him it was his only chance for safety. Inside, the air was cool, and the scent of incense filled the space. The floor was made of polished stone, and intricate tapestries hung from the walls, depicting scenes of alien landscapes and battles long forgotten. Jackson's eyes lingered on the tapestries, fascinated by the detail and artistry. He wondered who had created this place and why it had been left to decay. As he moved deeper into the hall, his footsteps echoed off the stone, and he felt a strange sense of foreboding. It wasn't long before he encountered her. The woman stood in the center of the chamber, her back to him. She was tall, her body encased in flowing robes made of some shimmering material that caught the light in a way that made her seem almost ethereal. Her hair was a cascade of silver, falling in waves down her back. But it was her eyes that captured Jackson's attention. They were unlike anything he had ever seen, deep glowing purple with an intensity that seemed to look right through him. For a moment, neither of them moved. Jackson's heart raced as he realized who she was. The queen of this strange world, he thought. There was no mistaking the regal presence she exuded, even in her silence. "You're not supposed to be here," the woman said, her voice soft yet commanding. Her accent was unlike any language Jackson had ever heard, but somehow he understood her perfectly. I'm lost," Jackson stammered, his voice betraying his confusion. "My ship crashed. I'm alone. I didn't mean to intrude." The queen turned slowly to face him. Her gaze was piercing, and for a moment Jackson felt as though he were being examined by something far older and wiser than himself. "Lost, you say?" she murmured, her lips curling into a slight smile. "Perhaps you were meant to be here." Jackson swallowed hard. The queen took a step forward, her movement fluid and graceful, like a predator stalking its prey. There was an undeniable power in her presence, something that made the air feel thick with tension. "I can help you," she continued, her eyes never leaving his. "But you must follow my rules." Jackson, still unsure of what to make of the situation, nodded. His mind raced, trying to process what was happening. He was in the presence of a queen, of a being from another world, and he had no idea what kind of danger that might entail. "Thank you," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos in his mind. The queen's smile widened, and she motioned for him to follow her. "Come," she said. "The night is long, and you need rest." Jackson hesitated for a moment, then followed her deeper into the palace. The corridors were dark, but the queen's presence seemed to light the way. She led him to a large chamber, where a banquet table was set with food Jackson had never seen before. Strange fruits, meats, and glowing liquids filled the table, their colors vibrant and otherworldly. He could smell the sweet aroma of the fruits and the savory scent of the meat, and despite his confusion, his stomach growled in anticipation. "Eat," the queen said. "You'll need your strength." Jackson sat at the table, his mind still spinning. The queen joined him, her movements fluid and deliberate. She didn't speak much during the meal, but Jackson could feel her eyes on him, studying him. He ate in silence, grateful for the food but unable to shake the feeling that something was off. As the meal came to an end, the queen rose from her seat. "Rest now," she said. "You will need your energy for tomorrow." Jackson watched as she left the chamber, her silhouette disappearing into the shadows. He sat alone for a moment, unsure of what to do next. The walls seemed to close in on him as the weight of the situation settled over him. He had no idea where he was or what kind of trouble he had found himself in. All he knew was that he needed to be cautious. But before he could gather his thoughts, exhaustion overtook him. The journey, the crash, and the strange encounter had drained him more than he realized. He laid down on the soft bedding, closing his eyes. And then everything went black. The next morning, Jackson woke with a strange feeling in his chest. The air was still and quiet, and for a moment he wondered if it had all been a dream. But as he sat up, he noticed something that made his heart skip a beat. His clothes were gone, replaced by a set of ornate robes that felt too rich for him. He looked around in a panic, his mind racing, but before he could gather his bearings, the queen entered the room. She stood at the door, her gaze fixed on him with a look of satisfaction. "Good morning, my husband," she said, her voice low and almost teasing. Jackson froze. "Husband," he echoed, his voice a whisper of disbelief. The queen's smile deepened. "Yes, husband," she repeated, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. Jackson's world tilted. What had happened? How had this happened? Jackson's mind raced as he processed the queen's words. "Husband?" The word felt alien in his mouth, the idea of it utterly surreal. His heart pounded in his chest, and his body tensed as he tried to make sense of what was happening. Just the night before, he had been lost, confused, and trying to survive in an unfamiliar jungle. Now, somehow, he was waking up in a palace, dressed in strange robes, and being called the queen's husband. Queen Zelara, she had introduced herself as such the night before, stood before him, her presence radiating power. Her eyes, still glowing with that otherworldly purple hue, studied him with an expression that was both commanding and unreadable. She was beautiful, undeniably so, but there was an aura around her that made it clear she wasn't just a figurehead. She was the ruler of this place, a queen in every sense of the word. "I don't understand," Jackson stammered, standing up from the bed and taking a step back. Why, this is insane." Zelara's smile never faltered, though there was a hint of amusement in her eyes. "It may seem strange to you, Jackson Wells," she said, her voice steady and calm. "But to my people it is not. You are the one chosen by the gods, the one destined to stand by my side." "Chosen by the gods?" Jackson repeated, his confusion growing. He ran a hand through his hair, trying to think through the fog that clouded his mind. "What are you talking about?" "I didn't come here willingly. I was just stranded after my ship crashed. There's been some mistake." The queen tilted her head slightly, considering his words. "No mistake. Your arrival was foretold long ago. The gods have watched over you, Jackson. They have brought you to me, and now you must fulfill your purpose." Jackson shook his head in disbelief. "I'm just a man, a human from Earth. I'm not some chosen one. I don't belong here." Zelara's expression softened slightly, but her eyes remained fixed on him with an intensity that sent a shiver down his spine. "Perhaps you do not understand yet, but you will. The ritual we performed last night was not an accident. It was a bond, a joining of two worlds. You and I are now bound, not just by ceremony, but by destiny." Jackson stumbled backward, his mind spinning. He didn't want to be part of this. He didn't want to be tied to an alien queen and dragged into whatever political game she was playing. But as much as he tried to push the thought away, there was a nagging sense deep inside him that told him there was no escape. Whatever force had brought him here, whatever had happened last night, it wasn't something he could undo. "I don't remember much from last night," Jackson admitted, his voice lower now, tinged with frustration. "I remember the drink you gave me and then nothing. I woke up and here I am in your palace wearing these robes. What did you do to me?" Zelara's gaze softened, a touch of compassion in her expression. "The drink was part of the ritual. It was meant to prepare you to open your mind to the truth of this world, to bond us, to make you understand that you and I are now one in purpose and spirit. You are my consort, my partner in the governance of this kingdom." Jackson's stomach twisted at the word consort. He felt trapped, like a pawn in a game he didn't understand. The room felt smaller, the air heavier as the weight of Zelara's words sank in. He didn't want to be her consort. He didn't want to stay in this alien palace, in this strange land, with no way to return home. "I don't want this," he said, his voice cracking with the frustration building inside him. "I just want to go back to my crew. I want to leave this place." Zalara's eyes darkened slightly, though her voice remained calm. "There is no leaving now, Jackson Wells. You have crossed the threshold. The ritual has been completed. You are bound to me and to this world." Jackson clenched his fists, fighting the anger and fear that surged through him. He wanted to shout, to argue, to find some way out of this madness, but he knew deep down that it wouldn't change anything. He was stuck here, whether he liked it or not. He had no idea how to return to Earth, and even if he did, what would happen to the rest of his crew? What if they were stranded here too? "You should rest," Zalara said suddenly, breaking through his thoughts. "You have a long day ahead of you. There is much to learn, and you must prepare." "Prepare?" Jackson repeated, his voice flat. "For what?" "For the future," Zalara answered cryptically. "Our enemies will not take kindly to this union. They will challenge us. They will seek to destroy what we have built. You must be ready to fight." Jackson stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. Enemies? He hadn't signed up for any of this. He wasn't a warrior. He was an astronaut, a scientist. He had no idea how to fight alien factions or protect a kingdom. "I'm not a fighter," he said quietly, shaking his head. "I'm not cut out for this." Zalara's gaze softened again, her tone becoming more gentle. "You may not see it yet, but you are more than just a man from Earth. You are now a part of something greater. You will learn to fight, to lead, and to protect. You will be stronger than you think." Jackson felt a strange knot of uncertainty in his chest. Part of him wanted to argue, to refuse, but another part of him, something deeper, more primal, recognized that he didn't have a choice. He had to adapt, he had to survive. For whatever reason, he had been chosen for this role, and there was no going back. "I'll give you the time you need to adjust," Zalara said, her voice warm. "But know this, you are now my equal. You have a place here, and you have a purpose. Together, we will face whatever challenges come our way." As she turned and walked toward the door, Jackson was left standing in the center of the room, his mind whirling. He couldn't comprehend it all. This strange, alien world, the bond he now shared with the Queen. The enemies she spoke of. Nothing made sense, but one thing was clear. His life had changed forever, and there was no turning back. The days following Jackson's strange bonding with Queen Zalara passed in a blur of confusion and overwhelming change. He had little time to process the reality of his situation, as Zalara wasted no time in preparing him for the role he now occupied in her kingdom. Every morning he would wake to find himself in the lavish palace, surrounded by servants, aliens with smooth, metallic skin and eyes that glowed with a faint blue hue. They would dress him in robes that seemed woven from the very essence of the palace itself, luxurious and incomprehensible in their design. The fabrics shimmered in the light, changing color depending on the angle, making him feel even more out of place. It was nothing like the simple, utilitarian suits he had worn on Earth. Zalara would visit him each day, guiding him through the customs of her people. She would teach him how to speak the language, though it was unlike anything Jackson had ever heard. At first, the words twisted his tongue, but soon, his brain began to grasp the basics of communication, enough to hold simple conversations with those around him. Despite the strangeness of the situation, Jackson found himself drawn to Zalara. There was something about her, an unspoken strength, an ancient wisdom behind those violet eyes that captivated him. He couldn't deny that there was a connection between them, even if he didn't fully understand it. But with that connection came responsibility. She had called him her consort, and whether he liked it or not, it seemed that he was now a central part of her rule. He spent his days learning the ways of the alien kingdom. The palace was a marvel, far beyond anything he could have imagined. It stretched far and wide, with grand halls lined with sculptures of creatures that didn't look entirely real, part animal, part machine. It was as if the palace itself was alive, its walls breathing with energy. There were gardens with bioluminescent plants that shifted in color as though they were alive, and fountains with water that sparkled as if powered by stars. But there was also a darker side to this world. The more Jackson learned, the more he discovered that Zalara's kingdom was not as secure as it appeared. There were whispers of an uprising brewing, a faction that sought to overthrow her and claim the throne for themselves. She had enemies, and some of them were closer than he realized. "You must prepare," Zalara told him one evening, her voice low and serious as they walked through a dimly lit corridor. "They will come for us soon." They are gathering in the shadows, plotting against everything we've built. Jackson looked at her, a knot forming in his stomach. He had known that something wasn't right, but hearing her say it aloud made it all the more real. "What am I supposed to do?" he asked, his voice more strained than he intended. "I'm not a warrior, I don't know how to fight." Zellara stopped walking and turned to face him. Her eyes locked onto his with an intensity that made his heart skip a beat. "You are more than just a man from Earth. You were chosen because you have the strength inside you. You will learn what you need to know. You will fight when the time comes." Jackson swallowed hard, unsure of what to make of her words. He had no military training, no combat experience. His job had always been in space exploration, not in battle. Yet there was something in her voice that made him wonder if she truly believed he could do this. "Trust me," she said, her tone softer now, but no less certain. "You are capable of more than you think." He nodded slowly, not fully convinced but unwilling to argue. Zellara had already shown him more kindness than he had expected, and he couldn't shake the feeling that she was right. Somehow, he was meant to be here, in this strange new world. That night, after another long day of lessons, Jackson sat in his room, staring out the window at the alien sky. The stars were unlike any he had seen before, their patterns strange and unfamiliar. He felt a deep sense of isolation, far from Earth, far from everything he had known. The weight of his new role as the Queen's consort pressed heavily on him. He missed the simplicity of his old life, the familiarity of his crew, the mission. All of that seemed like a distant memory now, replaced by a world that felt both wondrous and dangerous. He had been thrust into a position of power, and yet he had no idea how to wield it. The door to his chamber opened quietly, and Zellara stepped inside. She was dressed in flowing robes that shimmered like the night sky, her hair cascading around her shoulders. The sight of her left him momentarily speechless. She was regal, beautiful, but there was something more to her. She radiated a strength that Jackson could feel in his bones, and it unsettled him. "I know you are struggling with this, Jackson," she said softly, crossing the room toward him. "But I need you to understand, this is not just about you or me. This is about the future of my people. My kingdom is fragile, and without your support, we may not survive the coming storm." Jackson turned to face her, meeting her eyes. "I don't know what I can do to help," he admitted. "I'm not what you think I am, I'm just a human." "I don't belong here." Zellara's expression softened, and she reached out, placing a hand gently on his shoulder. "You belong here more than you realize. I chose you because I believed in you. The gods chose you because you have the strength to change everything." He didn't know what to say to that. He didn't feel strong. He felt like a stranger in a strange land, someone who had no business being here. But as he looked into Zellara's eyes, something inside him stirred, a sense of purpose, perhaps. He had been brought here for a reason, and no matter how much he wanted to fight it, he had to accept that. "I'll do what I can," Jackson said finally, his voice steady despite the uncertainty in his chest. "But I'm not a soldier. I'll need help. I'll need time to learn." Zellara smiled at him, the expression a mixture of approval and affection. "You have time, and I will help you every step of the way." With that, she turned to leave, but then paused at the door, glancing back at him. "Jackson, when the time comes, you will fight, for me, for us. I have no doubt you will do what is necessary." He watched her leave, her figure disappearing into the shadows of the palace. He felt a strange sense of calm wash over him, despite the fear and uncertainty that still gripped him. He had been thrust into this world by forces beyond his understanding, but he wasn't going to run away. He had no choice but to face it, to learn what he could, and to fight when the time came. For better or worse, his life had changed forever. And somehow, he knew there was no going back. The days of preparation turned into weeks, and Jackson found himself becoming more entrenched in the world that had been thrust upon him. He had expected to feel more resistance, to fight harder against his role as Zellara's consort, but something had shifted. As much as he fought it, as much as he longed to return to Earth, he had come to understand that this place needed him, and maybe, just maybe, he needed it. Zellara had kept her promise. She had taken him under her wing, teaching him everything he needed to know about the kingdom she ruled. She showed him the politics, the alliances, the delicate balance of power that held the kingdom together. She explained the threat from the rival faction, the ones who wanted to overthrow her and seize control. They were dangerous, ruthless, and their leader, Zallar, was a formidable opponent. He was a man of ambition and deceit, and he had his eyes set on the throne. For the first time since he had arrived on this alien world, Jackson felt a fire ignite inside him. He wasn't just an observer anymore. He was part of this. Whether he liked it or not, his actions would shape the fate of this kingdom. "You will need to learn to defend yourself," Zalara had told him one evening, her voice soft but firm as they sat in the grand hall overlooking the gardens. "Not just for me, but for the kingdom. We have enemies on all sides, and I will not let them take what we have built." Jackson nodded, though a feeling of unease settled in his chest. Training for combat was something he had never imagined himself doing. He had been a scientist, an astronaut, exploring the unknown, but never a warrior. Still, he couldn't deny the urgency in Zalara's words. He couldn't ignore the threat hanging over them. The training began the next day. Zalara had arranged for him to meet with one of her most skilled commanders, a woman named Sira. She was a warrior through and through, with short black hair, piercing green eyes, and a no-nonsense attitude that immediately put Jackson on edge. "You've never fought before?" she asked, raising an eyebrow as she examined him closely. Jackson shifted uncomfortably, feeling out of place in the practice room. The floor was made of smooth stone, and various weapons lined the walls, swords, energy blades, and a variety of alien weapons he couldn't even begin to identify. "No," he admitted. "I'm not a soldier. I'm not even a fighter." Sierra gave him a long, appraising look. "You're not the first to be thrown into this position, consort," she said, her voice low. "Zalara has had her share of consorts who have struggled with the same challenge, but I'm here to teach you. And if you want to survive, you'll learn quickly." Jackson gulped. "What do I have to do?" Sierra's lips curled into a faint smile. "First, we'll start with the basics: strength, balance, focus. You'll need them all if you're going to face Zalar's forces." The training was grueling. Each day, Jackson found himself pushed harder than he had ever been before. He had no natural talent for combat, his body wasn't built for it, but he refused to give up. For the first time since he'd arrived on this planet, he felt a sense of purpose. It wasn't just about learning how to fight. It was about protecting Zalara, protecting the kingdom that was now his responsibility too. Zalara would often watch him from the sidelines, her gaze unwavering, her expression unreadable. At first, Jackson felt embarrassed, as though she was judging him for his lack of skill, but over time, he began to realize that she wasn't looking at him as a failure. She was looking at him with hope, with the belief that he could rise to the challenge. As the days passed, Jackson's progress was slow but steady. He began to improve in small ways: his posture while holding a weapon, his reflexes when practicing with Sierra, his ability to stay focused even when fatigue set in. But what he noticed the most was the change in his mindset. He wasn't just fighting to learn anymore. He was fighting for something greater. But even as Jackson trained, the shadow of Zalar loomed over them. It was clear that the rival faction was not idle. They were growing stronger, and their spies were everywhere, lurking in the corners of the palace, gathering information. The threat was real, and the time was fast approaching when they would have to face it head-on. One evening, Zalara summoned Jackson to the war room. The air was thick with tension as she stood at the center of the room, a holographic map of the kingdom projected before her. The map flickered with the positions of her allies and enemies, their movements tracked by advanced sensors. "They're moving," Zalara said, her voice low but resolute. "Zalar has made his move. His forces are closing in." Jackson felt a tight knot in his chest as he studied the map. The rival faction's troops were marching toward the palace, their numbers growing every day. It wouldn't be long before they would arrive, and Jackson knew that the time for preparation was running out. "What do we do?" he asked, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at him. "We fight," Zalara answered, her eyes flashing with determination. "We stand our ground. I will not let him take my kingdom, not without a fight." Jackson nodded. There was no turning back now. He had trained for this moment whether he was ready or not, and he would fight not just for Zalara but for the kingdom that had become his home. The night before the battle, Zalara came to his quarters. She stood in the doorway for a moment, her presence filling the space. "Are you ready?" she asked, her voice quiet but full of meaning. Jackson looked at her, the weight of the moment settling in his chest. He wasn't sure if he was ready, but he knew he had no choice. "I will fight," he said, his voice strong. Zalara stepped into the room and closed the door behind her. She walked toward him, her eyes never leaving his. "Good," she said softly, her voice full of pride. "You are not just a consort, Jackson. You are my partner, and together we will protect this kingdom." For the first time since he had arrived, Jackson felt a spark of true conviction. He wasn't just a man caught in a foreign world anymore. He had a purpose. He had a duty. And when the battle came, he would stand beside her. The morning of the battle arrived, heavy with tension and the anticipation of what was to come. Jackson stood at the edge of the palace grounds, gazing out at the horizon. The sun had just begun to rise, casting an eerie light over the landscape. His heart pounded in his chest, each beat echoing his nervous energy. The training, the lessons, everything he had endured over the past few weeks had led him to this moment. There was no turning back now. Behind him, he could hear the sounds of the palace preparing for war. The clang of metal as soldiers donned their armor, the low murmur of commanders issuing orders. Everything had been set into motion. This wasn't just about defending Zelara's throne anymore. It was about protecting her, the kingdom, and the people who had come to rely on her leadership. "You're ready," Zelara's voice came from behind him. He turned to face her, and for a moment the world seemed to pause. She stood tall and composed, her violet eyes sharp and unwavering, her silver hair flowing freely around her shoulders. She was beautiful, but it was the strength in her presence that struck him the most. She was the queen, and this kingdom would fight for her, just as he would. "I don't feel ready," Jackson admitted, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "I've never done anything like this before." Zelara smiled, her expression softening. "None of us are truly ready for battle, Jackson, but we face it because we must. You've come a long way. You've learned, you've fought, and now you stand beside me. That is all that matters." Her words, simple but full of meaning, gave him a sense of calm. She had always believed in him, even when he didn't believe in himself. She saw something in him he couldn't see yet, and that faith had driven him to push forward when everything felt impossible. The sound of approaching footsteps pulled him from his thoughts. Sierra, the commander who had been training him, arrived with a group of soldiers behind her. They were ready, armored, armed, and focused. Jackson's gaze moved over them, each one an embodiment of the strength and determination that had come to define this kingdom. "You're with us now," Sierra said, her voice firm but not unkind. "It's time." Jackson nodded, taking a deep breath as he adjusted the weapon strapped to his side. It felt strange, heavy, and foreign, but it was a symbol of his commitment to this fight. He wasn't just a human stranded in an alien world anymore. He was a part of something greater. He was a partner to the Queen, a defender of this kingdom, and that was a role he couldn't turn his back on. The sound of horns echoed through the air, signaling the start of the battle. Jackson followed Zelara and Sierra as they led the way to the battlefield. The palace gates opened, revealing the vast expanse of the land stretching out before them. In the distance, Jackson could see the enemy forces gathering, a sea of soldiers, their armor glinting in the early morning light. Zallar's army was larger than they had anticipated, but Zelara's soldiers were determined. They had fought and died to protect this kingdom, and they wouldn't give up without a fight. "We may not have the numbers," Zelara said, her voice cutting through the air as she addressed her troops. "But we have something stronger, our will to survive. We fight for our kingdom. We fight for our future, and we fight for each other." Her words were met with cheers from the soldiers. Jackson felt the power of those words in his chest, a surge of energy and purpose that pushed aside the fear. He wasn't alone in this. They were all fighting together. Jackson stood beside Zelara as they surveyed the battlefield, his heart racing as the enemy began to advance. There was no turning back now. The first wave of soldiers clashed, the sound of battle ringing out across the plains. Jackson raised his weapon, feeling the weight of it but also the responsibility it carried. He had trained for this, and now it was time to act. He followed Sierra's orders, positioning himself at the front lines with the other soldiers. The battle was fierce. Jackson found himself fighting with an intensity he didn't know he had. His training had prepared him, but nothing could truly prepare him for the chaos of war. The sound of clashing weapons, the shouts of soldiers, the thud of bodies hitting the ground. It was overwhelming, but he kept going. He fought not just for his own survival, but for the kingdom he had come to call home. As the battle raged on, Jackson found himself facing off against one of Zallar's lieutenants. The alien soldier was fast and skilled, and Jackson struggled to keep up. But in that moment, he remembered what Zelara had taught him. That strength wasn't just about physical power. It was about focus, about using his mind as much as his body. He saw an opening and seized it, delivering a blow that sent the lieutenant sprawling to the ground. The battle was far from over, but Jackson's heart swelled with a newfound confidence. He wasn't just surviving anymore, he was thriving. And with every strike, every movement, he felt more connected to this world, to the people fighting alongside him, and to Zelera. As the day wore on, the tide of the battle began to turn. The enemy forces were pushed back, and the momentum shifted in their favor. Zalor's soldiers, realizing they were losing, began to retreat. The sounds of battle slowly faded, replaced by the victorious cheers of Zelara's troops. Jackson stood in the midst of it all, covered in dust and sweat, his weapon still gripped tightly in his hand. He had fought and won, alongside Zelera, alongside the people he had come to care about. The battle wasn't over yet, but for the first time he felt like he truly belonged here. Zelera appeared at his side, her eyes scanning the battlefield. She was breathing heavily, but there was a look of satisfaction on her face. She had led them to victory, and together they had secured the kingdom's future. "You did it," she said quietly, her voice full of pride. Jackson turned to face her, his heart swelling with emotion. "We did it," he replied. The battle was won, but it was just the beginning. They had shown their strength, their resolve, and their unity. Jackson had proven to himself and to everyone around him that he was more than just a consort. He was a partner, a fighter, and a defender of this world. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the battlefield, Jackson stood beside Zelera, knowing that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. He had found his place in this world, by her side as her equal. And for the first time since he had arrived on this strange, alien world, he felt like he had finally found home.